What's up, fish friends? Michael with Fresh Flow Aquatics. Today we got a plant care guide. Rotala rotundifolia, one of the most iconic plants in the aquascaping world. What a perfect plant to fill out and give you that dense jungle look. You really couldn't ask for anything more when it comes to this gorgeous little stem plant. It's way easier to grow than a lot of other rotalas. It's quite constantly producing side shoots, so it fills in quickly. There's a ton of different varieties from lime green to orange or crimson red. Also, it's available at most local fish stores, sometimes even your big box. Rotala rotundifolia gets its name from the round, aka rotund shape of the terrestrial leaves. Submerged leaves grow a lot longer, forming more of a oblong shape. Rotala rotundifolia grows in the wild as a weed in rice paddies across Southeast Asia from Japan to Thailand. It also grows as an invasive species in parts of the Southeast US. That's a good reminder to never release your aquarium plants, especially if you live in the tropics. This is a very easy plant to grow. It really is an extremely durable plant. The one thing that you don't want to skimp on is lighting. It does require medium to intense lighting to get the most out of it. That doesn't mean expensive, just make sure that it's somewhat of a bright light with a full spectrum. In low light conditions, it'll spread horizontally with a lot of leggy and rooted clumps. Nutrient-rich soil is never a bad idea, but you could even grow this plant in sand or tie it to a chunk of wood, essentially as an epiphyte. I tied a bunch of free-floating clippings around this chunk of wood. Since then, it's filled in a lot with some of the stems from the soil, but I'm sure there's also some originals left. In terms of temp, pH, KH, and GH, this plant does well in a variety of conditions. I've never had issues with growing it throughout all the different tanks over the years. CO2 is definitely optional. I use very trace amounts in this tank. I wouldn't say I get a ton of extra growth, but it does help keep the hair algae down. Regardless, you can still get spectacular growth without using carbon dioxide. Fertilizer is not a bad idea to get extra lush growth. Use a high nitrate one if you don't care about colors, or low nitrates for more reds. I'll explain about that a little bit later on. Variety and appearance. Okay, admittedly, it can be super difficult to identify the different varieties of Rotala rotundifolia. Also, there are a couple similar species of Rotala that are virtually identical. Indica Rotala, for example, technically needs to be grown out of water to have the flowers compared between the two species to differentiate them. Otherwise, you'll just have to trust the source you're buying from and make sure to take a good mental note or write it down. You'll notice that there's actually two different shapes of leaves in this tank. This one over here that's slightly broader is Rotala micrandra mini. Even within the species rotundifolia, there's tons of varieties. For example, in Vietnam, Atra is pretty common. It can grow anywhere from green to orange or crimson red. There's super red varieties and green ones, sunset ones. So how do you tell the difference? The best way to tell the difference is just to keep track of what you purchased, but sometimes they're not labeled well. Most of the ones I got here at Petco were just generic Rotala. So what I'd recommend is to do an experiment with the conditions and see what's what. Certain varieties like green and blood red will always retain their colors. Those varieties are pretty easy to identify, obviously. Others like Atra are difficult because their appearance changes based on the conditions that they're grown in. Generally speaking, low light and high nitrates, as in above, 5 or 10 parts per million in the water column, will result in green to light orange growth. Highlighting and low nitrates in the water column will result in extremely red growth. If you grow one way for a couple weeks and then try another way and nothing changes, then you can guess that it's one of those colored varieties, green, orange, red, whatever. If you do notice some changes, then it's probably Atra, the most commonly available Rotala rotundifolia variety. Without going into too much detail, the reason that the color changes is because nitrates are important for chlorophyll production. That's the pigment that plants use to turn light into food. That being said, it's not the only pigment that plants have. Like in the fall, when you see leaves drop, they always turn yellow and red. That's because the chlorophyll is the first pigment to break down basically, and all the other ones shine through. And it's basically the same thing with aquarium plants. It's kind of interesting when you think about it that way. We're basically providing the plant with all the resources it needs to make the other pigments and just not chlorophyll. And so we've kind of tricked it to grow in a different way. All right, now that I've talked about this plant for long enough, let's go over some trimming. There's basically two different ways to trim this plant. The first one is how I've done it. It's kind of a wild look where the heads are all at different levels. And then the other way you can trim it is basically like a highly manicured approach, the way that a lot of people will do their lawns. You level it off, and then everything grows back at the same time. So as heads grow, they're all at exactly the same level. And if you're looking at like competition tanks and like Dutch style aquariums, really manicured looking tanks, that's the approach you're gonna go for. So the first thing I do when I'm trimming is get rid of any of the real extreme outliers. These really long stems that kind of stick out of the way. And then as I'm looking at it, I want to open up some space down here. If we come look at it, you can see that those stems down there are looking a little rough, and that's because they're not getting enough light because it's so bushy up here. So I'm going to go ahead and take this area back quite a bit to open up some light down there. Alright, so it is important to do that kind of trimming every now and then. Look how much more light is getting down there. And then, so this is kind of what I was talking about before with both of those trimming styles. If you look like right here, you'll see that all of these heads are just chopped right off, and it's not really that fun to look at. But when I take care of little areas like that and leave other areas looking kind of natural, then the tank is still fun to look at. If I headed basically all the plants in here, then it would look kind of barren. So anyways, that's how I like to do it. Little bits in little bits at a time. I'm gonna go ahead and keep trimming back in a couple other spots. And already the tank's got a lot more shape to it. I'm gonna work on it a little bit more just to kind of tweak things. I need to chop up some of this area up front, and then I want to create a little pattern. I want it to wave back. That's it for Rotala rotundifolia. Let me know if you have any questions. Like, subscribe, support my channel. I appreciate it, especially if you found this useful. Thanks a lot. See ya.